Great. Well, welcome everyone, and thanks for coming to this session. I'm Christine. You all met me this morning with the Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund, and we actually commissioned this work that you're going to hear about today, and you're really the first audience that's going to get a full presentation on the results that we found. And I do want to thank we had some funders who helped make this possible, including the Northern Forest Center with help from the U.S. Endowment for Forestry and Communities and the U.S. Economic Development Administration, as well as the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board and the Agency of Commerce and Community Development. So put together a funding package to make this research possible. So on the table you will see these books. So if you didn't get one here, let's see, do you need one again?
Sure.
But feel free to grab the report. We will put this on our website probably in a week or so. So it will be available online as well. And there also are some props in the back of the room, and I think Sarah has handed out some for you to take a look at, and that will be relevant for today's discussion. But so I want to introduce Sarah Kelly with Common Threads Consulting. She has done a whole lot of work on the textiles side of things and put together a really great team. Her team included Guy Herman and Christine James, who are here in Vermont. Unfortunately, Guy took ill and thought it would be best not to come to a large event. So they're not here today, but they are part of the team that did the research and did the interviews and compiled all this information, and I think are making a really compelling case for the opportunity that a wood-based textile that would be produced in our region could really do. And I will tell you that when I started looking at this based on a lot of information that came out of Maine and also came out of the Northeast State Foresters Association. They have put together excellent work about sort of some of the potentials. But I will say, I had questions about, well, what about these textiles and how might this happen? And so I was just asking some basic questions and got connected to Sarah actually through my colleague Jana St. Ange with the Flexible Capital Fund, and was able to start digging in on this whole textiles industry, which, if you don't know, is enormous globally. And so really just trying to understand, like, could this be done here? Could wood-based textiles be produced here? And in a way that makes sense for our region. And I'm excited to say that the answer is yes. And so Sarah and her team really dug into those questions and interviewed experts around the region and around the country and other parts of the world to really best understand what the opportunities are. And it's a really interesting space, I will tell you. So with that, I'm going to let Sarah kick us off, and we'll do this as a presentation, and then we'd love to get questions from the audience, so there will be plenty of time for that. So thanks.
Great. Thank you so much, Christine, and thanks everyone for being here. How's the sound in the back, Shane? Can you hear okay? All right. Good. Well, thanks again, and I do really want to appreciate and acknowledge Christine James. We absolutely would not have had the opportunity to do this project without her interest and dedication and perseverance in making this happen. So thank you, Christine. Thanks for the opportunity to be here. And yes, I am sad that I'm the only person here, because there really are three of us in this team. Guy and Christine are East Burke residents, very dedicated to the community, longtime resident. For Guy, has done a ton of work with small businesses in Vermont. And Christine has a very long background in funding and financing for change, including as the former ED of the John Merck Fund. So she really brought huge depth of expertise as well in all of that work. So I'm missing them today, channeling their expertise, and if there's some questions that come up around their areas, we can field those questions. So I think you helped me get started, Christine. Let me get my timer going with some of our initial acknowledgements. Thanks to all of our sponsors, Christine, as well as Joe Short and Liz Gleason, and all of the people who gave us their time and expertise in interviews for this report. A number of you are in this room, and this is absolutely reflecting the expertise that you shared, as well as a lot of deep research in the scientific literature and industry publications. We also relied on some of the prior research that Christine mentioned for Maine, Northeast State Foresters, as well as some of the bigger research organizations in the textile space, especially Textile Exchange and tried to tap into what's emerging already from the Vermont Forest Future Strategic Roadmap. Thanks to our funders, and I want to give a shout out to Scott Sawyer for the design of our report. Again, it's on the back table, but we really love this, the look of this report, and hopefully makes it easy for you to access some of this somewhat technical data that we brought together. So just to recap some things about principles and our purpose and scope for doing this report. This was commissioned as a market opportunity assessment to really look at the possibilities of wood-based fibers for Vermont and the Northern Forest region. So wanting to look at the current state, the supply, demand, supply chain gaps, and really look for the market opportunity assessments for all, the opportunity assessment for those who are here today and the industry that you all care about so deeply. And that really, really has come through, that care for the land in this industry. So because of that, we took not too long into the report to look at the mission of VSJF, of the other sponsors, this real dedication to sustainable economic development for the land and communities. As Christine mentioned, we saw that past reports like For Maine and Northeast State Foresters have raised concerns about the conventional dissolving pulp and viscose process for making wood-based textiles. We started out with some of those concerns, absolutely saw those amplified, and that was combined, first of all, with the concern around some toxics use there, as well as the scale of capital investment that's needed for some of these major industry approaches. So we quickly, fully agreed with this and sort of ruled out that conventional dissolving pulp and viscose pathway as something that we would think to represent. It just did not feel like a match for this region. And that said, we still feel, as we dug into the research, that a lot of really exciting, new, emerging, and next generation pathways are emerging for this work. So that's what we want to focus on and share with you today. Just want to lay that context that we really did hear those concerns, look at that research, and we think we can move into that next frontier. As you'll see when I look at some of the background, in the past 2 or even 3 years, so much has shifted on the landscape globally and regionally that we felt open to these pathways. So let's take a quick look at some background information. Here's where your props are going to come in handy. So if anyone doesn't have their props, I'll hand them out. But first thing is to hopefully completely shift your idea of what you're thinking about when we say textiles. So we probably think about your clothing, right? That's the first thing we all think about. And I think it's commonly the case that this can get pigeonholed as like, oh, it's about fashion, it's for women, it's for girls. Textiles are around us every single day. So just look at this room right now. Look at the carpet, look at that sliding divider, all the other things that are around us in our daily life. We have rugs and carpets, mattresses, sheets and towels. And then we start to move into the category that we're going to really be focusing on today. Things like wipes and cleaning products. There's all kinds of automotive uses, upholstery, harnesses, that's in aerospace. Every time you fly, you're surrounded by all these textiles that are in seats, insulation. And we'll definitely focus in on the medical textiles that are used across the healthcare sector, both wearable textiles and things like bandages, and even down to the level of implantable textiles and kind of like patches that can be go in skin or even internally. I also appreciate this photo that you brought in yesterday, Christine, because it shows an orange PPE vest, such as you might wear in this industry or all kinds of other industries. And those PPE products are often made of textiles, and particularly non-woven textiles as well. So in this next slide, we'll keep going with our background here with a little bit other terminology of wovens versus non-wovens. So if you have your flannel shirt on or your trousers that are like your khaki trousers, those are going to be probably a woven textile. And you can see the structure on the right hand or your left, straight up and down, threads that go one way and that go the other way. So that's like a woven structure and has kind of like more of a stiffer feel. Knits, I think people are familiar with, your sweaters, they have that stretch in them. And then this third category of non-wovens, if you take your little wipe that I handed out, your little diaper wipe here, baby wipe, and if anyone doesn't have one, I have a kitty one. and you hold it to the light, you can see, hopefully, that you have, and we want one of these, it doesn't have, you can see that it's basically a kind of mat or membrane almost of fibers. You can see how they're not actually all going this way, but they're kind of like tangled over each other. And similarly, these face masks that I handed out, if you look at those up close, these are made of plastic. We definitely can do better. These, sorry, they're in a little noisy little plastic package here, but these also have that non-woven structure. You can see the fibers, and there's actually at least 2, if not 3 layers of those non-wovens that are in these and any and all face masks that we're wearing. I have lots of other items in the back there that I tried to give you a sample. Those reusable shopping totes are another place we see a lot of non-wovens that you're probably familiar with. And there are tons more materials that I didn't have time to collect from that list earlier. So hopefully just changing your thinking about textiles and taking that to a new place and thinking about how many of these products you're encountering on a daily basis, especially after the pandemic. That was a huge driver of non-woven textile demand and use and waste, which we'll look at again in a minute as well. So with all of that for background, this is where we started to really focus our research, really kind of narrow in our thinking on the possibilities. And that was helped along by the fact that a lot of technical research is showing that wood-based fibers, especially the growing field of cellulosic nanofibers that you heard Shane mention this morning, are especially well suited for these non-woven structures. You get to basically skip a whole entire step because you don't have to convert them into a thread or a yarn. You can go right from the filament, right from the fiber, and kind of put it into these matted or bonded structures. So we're hopefully seeing kind of like a good purpose for the way that the textiles are structured. So that's all.
Question, so what
Yeah.
is the nanofibers? What's an example?
So let me try, and I'm so happy that Shane is in the room because I'm going to make you punt, but right now the nanofibers themselves, and I have a slide on this that shows this in a lot more detail in just a minute, they can be the feedstock for a wide variety of products. So they can be used for coatings and packaging, some kind of insulation type of approaches. And what we're saying here is that there's this emerging area where they could also be made into a textile product. So they're like kind of a early stage that can then get turned into a lot of products. How'd I do?
Pretty good.
Do you want to add anything?
There's a couple of different types of nanocellulose. There's a cellulosic nanocrystals, which is chemically formed, and it's basically cellulose compounds that are formed together chemically. The University of Maine actually works in cellulosic nanofibrils, which is mechanically reduced fiber. So if you think about how you make mechanical pulp where there's grinding, we grind it so it's super fine, like super fine powder almost. But it's because of how it's highly fibrillated, it holds a lot of moisture. So it's more like a paste. And that is basically just really tiny cellulose fibers. So it has a very high surface area. And that gives it some very unique properties, such as being able to spin it into a fiber and make it into a textile fabric.
Always have the experts in the audience. It works out much better that way. I recommend it. So thank you, Shane. All right, so I want to move on and talk a little bit about some of the context around these new developments. So hold on to this, thinking about what kind of textile, what kind of fiber we're talking about, and some of the tech pieces that we just started to touch on. As I mentioned, just in the past few years, there have been very fast-moving developments on the global policy horizon and on our local and regional horizon that we think are really shifting the playing field for wood-based fibers in these specialized applications. Noise. Lot of detail here, so just quickly recap. In the EU, which feels really, really far away, but remember that a lot of these textile manufacturers and these mask manufacturers and all, they are multinationals. So they're paying attention to these European developments. The deforestation regulation says that wood-based products to be sold in Europe have to have a traceable supply chain that proves no deforestation happened. So as soon as you can offer a traceable supply chain, like say from Vermont, you have an advantage in this global market. The Waste Framework Directive says that there's going to have to be separate collection of textile waste by 2025. So that means cities, towns, municipalities, and manufacturers are going to have to start paying attention to where textiles go at the end of their life cycle and what happens to them. The EPR regulations say that those companies that are churning out these textiles are going to have to start also taking more responsibility for making sure they can have take-back programs and do something with them at the end of life. And earlier, the Single-Use Plastic Directive is starting to put limits on the kinds of single-use plastics that could be sold in Europe, and one of the particular items was diapers. So if you think about diapers as a single-use plastic, you can quickly see that this is also a single-use plastic. And tons of these other kind of like plasticky textile things that are all around us now are sort of like in the tractor beam for the next wave of these European regulations that are going to restrict and ban these. So again, manufacturers are really, really watching this, and they're really looking for non-synthetic, biodegradable feedstocks for these kind of items. Good thing you have a biodegradable, non-synthetic feedstock that you're producing here in Vermont. It's really handy. So we'll say more about how it was a big jump, but that's where we started to see the opportunity. Regionally, we just heard a ton about this morning, so I won't go into this, but these local and regional processes we see as a really great opportunity to just kind of bundle these non-woven textiles into the kinds of innovative products that you're already talking about. You have the great setup to talk about that, and you have the expertise and the folks that are in this confer already, kind of like with a great setup to bring these products into conversation.
Just another one to add to that too is, you have these reusable consumer bags. So Maine has a plastic bag ban now.
Oh, that's such a great point.
Vermont does too.
Great
Okay,
point.
so every Mainer's got a half a dozen of those in every car they have, so
Yeah.
that they always have them with them because you can't get them in the store because you can't, little
Yeah.
single-use bags.
Yeah, and those are reusable, but they're still plastic. So
Right.
they're still going to have to be
There's
landfilled
an
at the end of
opportunity.
life, and they're still not biodegradable. So possibly we could do better. I feel like all these products, we know we can do better. Thank you. Great addition. So we have that as our kind of surrounding context, and let's look at one other important piece of context on the global textile industry overall. So this graph comes from Textile Exchange, really fantastic source of information in a place where global companies that already make the apparel kind of wood-based fibers are starting to gather and kind of think about what they need to do to get out ahead of that context. So unpacking this just a little, the yellowish colored bar is what they call, I think sort of a clunky acronym, man-made cellulosic fibers, or MMCFs. We try to stay away from that, but you'll see that in the industry reports, MMCFs. So right now that means the clothing type of fibers, so viscose, Tencel, which is a brand name for lyocell, that one is like improved and better, more circular, more sustainable, but it's still in that sort of dissolving pulp pathway. There's a few others like modal, there's acetates, there's a kind of a variety. They're actually one of the fastest growing categories if you see the trajectory across time. The other thing I want to point out is that everything in blue at the bottom of the bars is all plastics. It's oil-based synthetic textiles, polyester, polyamide, and nylon, and other synthetics. So all of that is being made out of oil-derived feedstocks.
So it's better than 50%.
It's almost 2/3. Almost 2/3, this is the next slide, almost 2/3 of all the textiles that we're wearing and using are made out of oil. And we're seeing this sort of shrinking share of the natural fiber textiles from animal fibers, from plant fibers. And we're seeing this growth in the MMCFs, but it's this highly digested, dissolving pulp pathway for the MMCFs. So this is kind of like our overall global context. And just growth period, as you can see, it's really, really skyrocketing. And yes, we want to see growth for our local economy, and we want to see these market development, but I think at this point, this is being flagged as a major problem, the rapid growth in the consumption and disposal of textiles. So if we have the opportunity to make something that's designed from the start for biodegradability and full circularity, then hopefully we can be part of that solution. We know this is demand, people want these products, they're using them, but can we do it so that we're not contributing to the problems in the industry? So I think this next slide will kind of recap a little of what I was just saying. So as you rightly pointed out, it is a very, very substantial portion now, almost 2/3 that is oil-based in all the things that surround us. This is kind of contributing to, obviously, to climate, to the persistence of oil and gas extraction, because there's a demand to use them for these other products now, even as we're trying to shrink our use of gasoline and other products. Plastic textiles are a demand driver. I think I've spoken about most of these other things, so just to recap, these are among the other reasons why we felt like that was not going to be a viable pathway for the region to sort of tap into that conventional pathway. And I mentioned briefly, textile waste is a huge and growing issue that's receiving increasing scrutiny from, again, cities, towns that are dealing with it, and from global NGOs that are flagging the way that we're exporting this to especially the global south. This is piling up on beaches, in deserts. There's no away, right? We throw our clothes away, we throw things away, but it's going somewhere, and since they're plastic, many of them, they don't biodegrade. So this is what we end up working with and looking at. And that's not just a global south issue. In the US, textiles are the fastest growing component of municipal waste. They're going to landfills, they're just sitting there, not biodegradable. And when we looked at Vermont, with only one landfill and a projection that it's going to fill up by, I think it was 2043, it seemed like any little thing, any percentage that you could take off the top of that to avoid filling that and having to expand that or relocate that would be a plus for the state and the region.
So average consumer buys 60% more items for clothing than 15 years ago.
And then we don't wear them as much anymore. We don't keep them as long. No, we may not have a lot of average consumers in this room. I think they're like a millennial audience. But across the board, we're seeing that churn, and we're seeing brands really feed into that, right? They're always marketing, oh, it's the next thing, it's got a zipper over here, or it's got this, or it's the season's length, and it's high and it's low, and it's wide and short, whatever. Like, we're seeing brands really drive that disposable fast fashion is what you hear often called. Okay, so I'm gonna go to the next one and then take a pause and see if there's questions. So bringing all those reasons together, all that background information, this new terminology about nonwovens, this is where we really started to see the new horizons emerge. First is the opportunity to create a textile that is recyclable from the very start and tap into what we heard about this drive and demand for recycling within the industry. And second is the emerging area of cellulose nanofibers, or nanofibrils, perhaps more correctly, for eventual textile use, as well as all the other potential uses that Shane spoke about. But seeing that as like very, very emergent. Those are the kind of two big pieces that we tried to pull together in our pathways, and we really believe there's this opportunity to be part of the solution. I heard this language this morning too, that people want these products, they want climate smart, climate thoughtful products, and so this is where we're seeing the opportunity come through. I'm going to touch really briefly next on supply and demand and some workforce issues, but let me pause. This is a lot of information and only one person to share it with you. Are there questions or thoughts that anyone wants to put in the mix? Good for now. Anyone need more props? Okay. So we really wanted to honor the request in our scope of work to look at supply and demand, and we had a very strong commitment to looking at the labor and economic justice issues that you heard Erica speak about this morning, making sure those were part of our consideration. The top line for supply is that because this is very new, very lab scale and emergent, supply is really not a limiting factor right now for this wood-based textiles. We know that this lower grade wood is a problem to find markets for. We heard that across the board. Even, very, very importantly, even if we factor in, and we want to appreciate Ali Kosova from UVM for helping us think about how important that slash is to leave behind for ecosystem benefits, even factoring that in and making sure we're leaving enough in the woods, there's still plenty for the lab scale nature of this industry. And with those changing climate considerations that were front and center this morning, we actually think there could be an opportunity to sort of co-develop the adaptations, different harvest timing, different species mix that we know you're facing with what kind of wood-based fibers could be developed. Because right now in the scientific literature, there's all different types of feedstocks being used. Softwoods, mainly softwoods, but could be different species. Some people are even working with agricultural waste or mixes. So there's lots of opportunity to sort of like tailor and bring these together as conditions change and conditions have to be adapted to. You can see the photos. Again, thanks to Ali Kosova for sharing those. And you know these are front and center for you as you're thinking about the conditions and the supply factors. This was really Guy's specialty, so I'm feeling that I'm missing his expertise right now. I'm going to keep it high level like that and try to answer questions that you might have.
I just have a question.
Sure.
Being a non-Vermont resident, from our foresters or loggers, what's kind of the mix of hardwoods to softwoods in the state? 40, 60, 50, 50?
Definitely more hardwood. I'd say pretty close, at least 60%, maybe more. What'd you say, Paul?
Yeah, I would say that's probably fair.
So like 2/3, 1/3 maybe?
Pretty close.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, that's good to know.
And I think we were hearing that softwood's are the place where you're not seeing the markets for that lower grade wood.
Well,
as much,
the
so
softwood
we're going to focus on
pine,
that.
the low grade, the low grade softwood market, and the low grade hardwood market. There's plenty of
Okay.
uses for firewood and
Okay.
bio.
Yeah, we're about 50-50, so we have a lot more of the softwood
Right.
residues to really deal
To
with.
deal with, right?
So that's going to all be part of the conversation for sure, to develop this. For demand, we relied on these kind of for-profit market research reports. These are not a crystal ball, but it's useful to be able to compare because they look at all different segments. So just giving you a kind of snapshot here, this is specifically a report on non-wovens, so you can get kind of granular in looking at the demand trends that they're forecasting. The overall apparel industry has higher, I think it was 7% of this compound annual growth rate. But again, we're sort of almost feeling like there's a point at which it's too much and driving this not sustainable demand cycle. We also looked at one for biomedical textiles specifically that has a 3% compound annual growth rate over the next 7 or 8 years. So it's a little lower, but 3% is like a pretty steady, reasonable growth rate. We can definitely build a business on 3% growth. So just trying to get a handle on kind of where these are going. But none of these are declining. These are all going up. More people and more per capita consumption of all these non-woven textile types.
And this is a US,
This is global.
okay.
Yeah. We didn't put US data in the report. We can definitely get it for you in terms of US demand for textiles. But we wanted just more of a comparative snapshot for the different sectors.
It would be good to have the international and then have the US
Yeah.
in each page, just so people can make a comparison and see what the growth opportunities are with just that quick snapshot.
I mean, we can put that together like in a slide. It would have to come from a different source because this company does all global snapshots, but good suggestion. Okay, I'm going to flag that and keep going. We want to also make sure to mention that there's a large group of Northeast regional manufacturers already of these kinds of non-woven products. This is, someone said like there are businesses that are just they figure out what to do and they just do their thing and they're not really promoting themselves. They're in their niche, a B2B niche. A lot of these fall into that category, but they're solid businesses, potential partners. And there's a trade organization, INDA, which is the Association of Non-Wovens and Disposables, I think is the full name. So as a trade partner already that's working with these businesses, giving them a home and helping them think about what's next for their industry as well. Okay, and then here's where I really will not do justice to Christine James's expertise. She brought a huge amount of thinking on labor and economic justice into this report, and we tried to weave it throughout the pathways, but just want to emphasize some of the themes from this morning. This is a lab scale developing industry, potential for planning ahead for the jobs of the future, those 8, 9, 10-year-olds, and really thinking about the kinds of training that could be needed and how to attract people with these other backgrounds to the state, as well as ensuring that other underrepresented populations have an opportunity to be part of this emerging sector. So now I'm going to move us into our pathways. This is a very dense, it might be easier to see in your report. And what I want to do is give you a quick kind of overview of why we put this graphic together, and then look at each pathway in turn, and then try to bring it back together to give you a sense of the big vision. What we're trying to show here in this graph overall is not like a timeline of every single thing that we think would happen or any kind of, again, crystal ball, but sort of like what are the surrounding contexts and some of the particular milestones that we know are coming over this 10-year time horizon, and how could we like tag on, how could we bring the textiles piece into these moving parts, just keep this on the table, on the radar screen as one of the options for the region as we move forward. And how do we take advantage of some of those opportunities that we looked at before? So our pathway 1 is that we could have the opportunity to catalyze local economic development of cellulosic nanofibers for textiles. We have so many other partners in the room. We heard about the ecosystem for innovation this morning. We think this could be like a homegrown possibility. That's not a right away income generator, obviously, because there's much work to be done. So in pathway 2, we think there could be opportunities to partner with some of the global companies that are on the leading edge of this, especially in the Nordic countries, for some type of technology or licensing partnerships as a kind of shorter term option. And then pathway 3, we're sort of like really going out there and saying that we think there could be an opportunity for Vermont and the region to actually start the textile recycling along with the wood fibers, which we acknowledge is not only focused on the forest products industry, but it seemed like this other industry that had the potential to meet some of the same goals, rural employment, employment for people that have been left out, a way to kind of be on the forefront of this problem that's a global problem that's being acknowledged but not really addressed. So let's look at those one at a time. I'm going to try to maybe take like 5 to 10 more minutes, and then we have plenty of time for your questions. I can always go back. So in pathway 1, I hope this text is coming out clear enough. We're essentially just sketching out some of the major steps in those 2 big processes, the Forest Future Roadmap, the Confair project, and just sort of pointing out that there is this window of time coming up when you have these opportunities to really look at these innovative approaches, that we think that textiles could be right there in the mix, these wood-based fibers, these non-wovens, much more technical approach to textiles, and keep that as something that we're exploring actively. In the report, I'm realizing this might have made more sense earlier in the slide deck, but in the report we use this pathway to really unpack the specifics of the cellulosic nanofibers and what the research is showing about it. So if you're looking for those more technical details, it's kind of under pathway 1. I think to the question earlier about what are these used for, this gives you a sense of the scale. It's a tiny, tiny, tiny scale, and it's not accidental, as Shane was saying. That is part of what gives them the special properties, and part of why the scientific research is showing this promise for this particular use.
Can I ask a nerdy question?
Definitely.
The hydrophilic and hydrophobic properties of those make a big difference for their application, is that part of the research question?
I have definitely seen that there is a greater hydrophilic because of the nanoscale, so that's why, I mean, these are not CNFs, but like wettability and use for these medical and other technical approaches. That's part of why these are being flagged as promising. Can you make them hydrophobic with other?
Yeah, you can modify the surface energy or the, you can basically create laminated systems. That's one of the areas of work is in creating a better chip bag, potato chips. It's got metal and plastic, so it's not recyclable. So creating oil and vapor barrier resistance and things like that. So you can modify those different layers chemically to behave like that, but still be biodegradable.
There's one review that we found, 2020 review, scientific review, that looked at 700 papers on like the spinning and processing of CNFs. So there's a ton of research going on. It's like you just scratch the surface and there's tons and tons. So if you want to have more nerdy questions, there are plenty of opportunities to really dig into it. And honestly, I found that so fascinating. It was really exciting to look at all this research. It's not exactly put out in the most accessible language, and part of the goal, part of what I hope is that we could help connect this huge body of research with this more practical commercialization. So we can say more about that in a minute. I'll go through these next a couple quickly because we've talked a lot about these moving parts with the two Vermont processes, but we just wanted to really emphasize that the commercialization scale, or the scale of projects that are going on right now, is much lower than the sort of like, wow, this is going to be $1 billion project, or wow, this is going to be $500 million project. In the report, we have a lengthy table at the back where I tried to dig in and find out about how much was being spent on each one of these Nordic pilots, grants that are happening over in the EU, whatever we could find out about commercial capitalization scale. So that 10 million to 30 million range is covering a lot of what's happening right now. It's not the full commercialization pathway, but it's not like we could get involved in this with a much lower capital scale.
Yeah, the chemical processes are very expensive capital-wise. Literally, the CNF process are double disc refiners, which are used in conventional pulp and paper manufacturing already. So it's just different plates in it, and then you create a system that just runs through it iteratively. So you just get that further breakdown. So it's a mechanical process, much less capital intensive costs.
Great, thank you. So just trying to summarize some of the things we saw. And we've talked about this a lot, so I won't linger on this, but we have this national recognition for what's happening in this region. Very exciting, one of these projects. Okay, so that was Pathway 1, so hold on to that. I'm going to bring these all back together, hopefully at the end. Here in Pathway 2, we want to acknowledge, again, Pathway 1 is not a quick fix, right? We're not going to start seeing like brand new businesses and all that happening in no time flat. So we think there's an opportunity to be in touch with some of these Nordic innovators and possibly have licensing or supply deals. We didn't go too far down the road of actually talking to these companies. We were a little hesitant to represent interests that we didn't know about before giving this presentation and really engaging with all of you. And some of these companies are sort of like in their own commercialization struggle maybe right now, like they're encountering some of the commercialization challenges that we've heard about. But they're definitely really far along this pathway. In particular, the Finnish or Finland-based company Spinnova, basically every source we read says that they're really the ones that have sort of cracked this nut and figured out how to make a fully non-chemical wood-based fiber at what they call a pilot industrial scale. They have a new factory in Finland. They have a joint venture with a Brazilian pulp maker called Suzano. They're opening a new factory in Portugal, and they have sort of like a 10-year goal, a lot of investor materials that are publicly available that you can look at about their process. They also just got a new CEO, and then they left, and then another interim CEO came in, and then one factory, they moved the location of the factory, so it's sort of like, okay, things are still shaking out, but I want to acknowledge their leadership for sure. And yeah, we're just feeling like that could be a possibility for the wood right now that is looking for a market, possibly exploring that, but again, early stage recommendation, but something that could have a quicker turnaround time. Yes?
I'm just curious, why is the pathway licensing versus, say, leveraging the manufacturing zone in the Northeast Kingdom to actually set up production?
Well, I think, if I'm understanding your question right, because I don't know that much about the manufacturing zone, that pathway 1 is where we're saying like, hey, what we really want to see is that this is homegrown, locally rooted, and the profits and all of that stay in the region. But in the shorter term, before that comes to pass, this could be a way to generate some type of revenue as well as forging commercial partnerships that could be beneficial. So not mutually exclusive.
Okay.
Is that answering your question?
I'm just thinking more on the manufacturing side, the strategy for manufacturing versus, like they've cracked the nut R&D wise, why reproduce that other than you own the IP. But if we have a free enterprise zone and they can set up manufacturing for export, grow the industry here, create local competition, knowledge, whatever, it seems like another pathway.
I think yes and yes. I think that's what we want to get across, is that those could both be. I feel like the piece like, oh, it's good except you don't own the IP. Because this is so new, it felt like that potential to own the IP was actually really significant and maybe something that was worth pushing for regionally, as opposed to just being like, hey, we'll borrow your process. But I don't know. Maybe it is better to work with the established ones and bring that here. So we said, I think I said it, the first one, I think we said something like supply and or licensing partnerships, like just figuring out what's possible.
Right.
So that was 2. Oops, sorry, I think I missed one slide, sorry. Oh, sorry, okay. Okay. 3 is where, again, we kind of like pushed even a little further out and looked at the possibility that the region could invest in the combination of recycled textiles and wood fiber. A key element here that I don't think I said earlier is that the cellulose and wood fiber and the cellulose and cotton is the same cellulose. So if you can break down and digest your recycled textiles and get that cotton and get that cellulose back out, you actually have the same molecule at the root of this combined fiber. And that's where some of the, again, Nordic innovative companies in this area of recycled textiles plus wood fiber, that's like the kind of core of their technology. One of those in particular is called Sudra. We got a crash course in pronouncing Finnish during the course of our interviews, so it's called Sudra. And they, together with Lenzing, which is a big Austrian MMCF producer, a big producer of Tencel, Lyocell, they have I think it's a $10 million EU grant right now to really expand what they're doing on this combination of recycled textiles and wood fiber. The advantage of that is the public money, so there'll be a lot more publicly disclosed research findings from that grant. And I think there'd be a lot for the region to learn from sort of tracking that. And we also kind of looked in this pathway and again, sort of tagged on to the fact that Vermont has started looking at textile waste as part of its own waste stream in the 2016, forget exactly what it was called, the Textile Use and Recycling Report. So this is a 2016 Vermont report that flagged textiles as particularly relevant for hopefully reducing and diverting from the waste stream. So looking at a few of those pieces a little bit more in Pathway 3, this is a press photo from Sudra, which I think is helps you get your head around what they're saying. The wood chips and the cotton are the same molecule at the root, and they're using that to make a new type of fiber. There's a Tennessee-based company as well, Eastman, that is doing this. And since they're one of the only US companies that's doing this, we flag them as potentially someone to, again, talk to about these partnerships of various kinds. And at the bottom, I put in a photo from a Spanish company that Guy spoke with called Pic Visa, and they manufacture kind of cutting-edge textile sorting equipment that uses near-infrared optical scanning, so that you can run like all the random things that are probably in those white bins. You know, you put your textiles and you shut that heavy bar. They can run all those textiles through these optical sorters, and it like puts them into these sorting bins, and it makes it much more efficient to think about how to run a textile recycling business. Again, this is probably in that $10 to $30 million range. It could be less, but it's not like impossible to think that you could start a business like this in the region and that you could have leadership on how to take these products and keep them from going to the landfill. So just want to wrap up in a couple more minutes here because it's a lot of info to absorb. I think I said this already, Pathway 3 there's a lot of moving parts, but this is a place that the world is, again, asking for products that are not contributing to waste, that are climate friendly, that are fully biodegradable, that are soil to soil, essentially, to use a phrase from the group fiber shed. And in here in Germany, they again have some models from the EU world about how to do this well, how to make these into clean businesses, decent jobs, decent working conditions. So we flagged a couple opportunities that could dovetail with Vermont processes. I think I've got 3 more slides. So just bringing this all back together, I want to emphasize not mutually exclusive. And in our little small text in the center there, we said we think these pathways could start to converge over time and have kind of this combined opportunity. For inspiration, we flagged a lot of models in the reports from different geographic regions that we think are scale kind of relevant. And I especially want to mention material return on the far right. It's a North Carolina-based textile recycler that just signed a deal with Smartwool to make a sock that is combo recycled textiles and new wool. And they also are part of a group that has been now a finalist for the NSF Engines Grant, the same one as Confair. They're a finalist. So we have potential for partnerships and learning from this close by partner in North Carolina, where I think there's a lot of similar values and goals for what economic development could look like. We want to emphasize something that was also said this morning. Tons of entities in the state are offering support for innovators. We need those businesses that want to take these emerging technologies and start to commercialize them. And Janice, I want to especially appreciate you for helping us identify some of these sources and for pointing out that we need that regional approach as well to help some of these entrepreneurs really get off the ground and get through that kind of commercialization pathway. We summarized our next steps. This is in the report, and I think I kind of went through it, but we thought that the think tank model that we're about to all be part of in the afternoon, we could do that for textiles. We need all those people in the room, the manufacturers, funders, scientists, to take it to the next level beyond what we could do. And I want to leave you with this very quirky and curious picture, kind of a little grainy, sorry, but I was just struck with this picture and thinking, like, what if we could see a future where all these non-woven textiles could go back to the same cellulose as the leaves they're sitting on, be fully biodegradable, as well as all the other stuff that's plastic right now that we're using, and have the region really be a leader in seeing that these could go fully back to the forest floor eventually, getting out ahead of that curve. So that is plenty of info for today. I want to thank you so much for sticking with it and listening. Tons and tons. Happy to try to answer questions, or if you just need a break, I'll be here and I can answer after. Thank you.
So those masks that we see, what's the percentage of what we saw? What were they? 50% oil? These the ones that we grabbed?
100. I'm going to go 100% oil. I think actually we looked on the box yesterday, right? It doesn't actually say fiber content, but I would be very certain that these are all polyester.
Okay,
And these are made in China and
so that's what we grab all the time.
all the time, yeah.
Lots of times they're polypropylene as well, too.
Polypropylene, yeah,
Polypropylene.
yeah, but it's an oil.
Yeah, it's all petrochemical
Yeah.
based.
Okay.
So,
Maybe the next draft will have a little bit of cellulose in it, but it'll still have some elastomers in it, give it the springiness.
These laces and edges are all soft, non-woven polypropylene.
polypropylene, okay.
Huh.
So, it might be a long time before we go 100% biodegradable, but even we get rid of, like, this part could be fully biodegradable, it'd still be an advantage over what we're working with now. Do you have a question?
Yeah, were you able, this may have been out of scope, but I'm curious about the economics. And, oil as a feedstock is still really cheap. And we've seen that be an issue with like other ideas to use woods, that wood is still more expensive.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, did you all look at that at all in terms of what it takes to be economically competitive? Is it within reach, or is it going to take some policy supports to
Yeah.
even the flame?
So we didn't specifically try to say the dollar value of like this would be the wood and this would be the oil-based one. I think because right now it's so early stage that where the dollars need to go is into like the lab facilities and the lab-based work, the piloting and commercialization. So it's so I don't know that we even would know the economics right now of making them fully because we need all that iteration and development. I do think, and I don't know if there's been like economic modeling around this, would be a good question that all of those EU regulations, which came out in 2023, 2024, 2025, I think those are going to start fundamentally changing what the economics look like, trickling down from Europe out into the multinational space and into the US. So it might be that we would need some time to see how that's landing before we could do it. Because that is the goal of them, is actually to change the economic playing field so that it's not just so easy to be like, well, we're always going to pick the cheapest material. Great question, though.
May I ask another one? Lab scale, can you help me understand what that looks like? I mean, I hear that, like that doesn't convey commercial.
Yeah.
So what does lab scale look like in a business setting, or maybe it wasn't? I just wanted to understand that
Yeah.
a little bit more.
We felt like that phrase would do a good job conveying that, we don't want to make false promises about the commercialization readiness right this second, but we did have that quote earlier. We talked to a lot of people who emphasized that it was like commercialization sort of right on the horizon. I heard you say this morning, like, I've been hearing that about some other products for 20 years. So yeah, hearing that, acknowledging that. I think what we would envision, and we learned a lot from Jared, with the Forestry Accelerator, sort of like that's the scale where we need to be supporting businesses right now. Other models that I had on this slide that Janice flagged for us, oops, wrong way. That's my color samples. Timber, HP, and Glavel, those were two that you mentioned to us that had taken 6, 7, 8 years for them to take these European technologies, figure out how to bring it over here, figure out how to build it up until they did have a marketable product. So I think that's what we mean when we say lab scale is kind of like, we need those entrepreneurs that are like, hey, there's an opportunity and I see that the scientific research is there, these 700 papers, but moving it kind of onto that next level. So it's not $1 figure to define that, at least as we used it. Is that answer? Other questions? Yeah.
Yeah, so I think it's really cool and exciting space, by the way. I'm curious about the competition like DuPont and others who are in this space already, and what you see them doing, and where you think, like, if you were advising a startup tomorrow, like, what's their market entry point? Would it be geotextiles, or like how would you see them kind of hitting the market first? Is it just bolts of cloth that anybody can buy and make masks or cloths from? What's the kind of, is there a strategy and is it clear enough?
I think it's a big question. There's like so many companies with so many niches. I think maybe a couple divisions. In the world of apparel, these brands are participating in Textile Exchange, and we had the chance to connect with some of them. They have we call it a roundtable for the man-made cellulosics. I think they are looking at ways to bring the combination of recycled fibers into their MMCFs. And so they want to keep the same market channels with apparel, and they want to market it as more green for more environmentally conscious for the consumers that they already have. On the more industrial and medical side, I think those really big like multinational chemical companies like DuPont that you mentioned, I see this more in my work on toxics and environmental health. They're kind of poorly incentivized right now to change what they're doing because they're making so much money and they're heavily subsidized to keep doing the kinds of work they're doing. So I don't really know if I have a great answer for like where would they target their efforts. And then I think the kinds of companies like we showed you from the INDA group that are like the smaller manufacturers, I think they're always looking for that competitive edge and how to tap into this climate conscious and green market. So they might be the ones that were more willing to pick up an innovation and look at trying to take it to that next scale in the marketplace. I think they would be more incentivized to do that than the sort of majors are. But they could buy, the majors could buy and acquire smaller companies. That's a common pathway. So I don't know if I could say the one particular approach.
On the big chemical side, the thing that's would change that their motivations would be like if states started adopting practices that medical gowns and masks need to start becoming more decarbonized.
Yep.
That would be the type of thing that would require them to either exit that market category or change what they do. That's what it would take. Because they're just, like you said, they're just such a massive operation that there is no incentivization unless there's something like a policy change like that.
Yeah.
Or shifts in market attitudes too, right? I mean, that's a big deal as climate change comes down. So
Yeah.
they can bet they've got their innovation group inside that's figuring this out right now as we're talking.
Yeah.
So.
And investors are another huge part. When investors stop rewarding for quarterly performance and start seeing that as a risk, a major risk, then you can start to see that shift as well. We have some totally separate research going on the kinds of metric systems that investors are looking at to make those calculations and those decisions.
And that could tie back to like their ESGs and things like that as well.
Yeah. Just when they start to see using reliance on petroleum as a material in the financial sense, material risk, then that can start to change how they think about where they want to direct dollars and who they're going to finance for expansion and what kind of expansion they would or would not finance. That's like probably someone's PhD right there, so it's like a PhD topic, maybe that's a good one. So, but it's a great question. I mean, how to change that.
Yeah, well, I'm just worried about how it lines up with your strategy one, which doesn't see any target coming out until like 2026, 2027. That's a lot of time. A lot's going to evolve while, we're doing a research grant around the problem that's kind of been solved, even if it's in Europe or whatever.
This is a fair point. It's a totally fair point. I think we would need to dig in further and figure out how important is it to have a local IP, like how much variability is there in different
Versus the first market.
right, or versus like, okay, they have a lock on the IP, so let's work with that fact. Maybe they do, maybe they don't, and this is where like the different products that are coming out of labs, we need more explanation or exploration.
I'm kind of curious, Shane, maybe you can speak to this because I know you maybe Orno is doing a lot of work in the space and really is looking at how to perfect some of this technology. Is there anything that you can share about what you're seeing up there, what the needs are at the university in order to make this really happen? What are you seeing as some gaps that need to be filled for this to materialize?
Yeah, and as most everybody knows, historically, New England had a lot of textile processing, but really that doesn't exist anymore. So as the university looks at working on applications in that, we have a real challenge finding partners, at least on a regional level. I mean, a lot of the times we're either going into the southeastern US or we're going international, which just adds a layer of complexity to any kind of collaboration. Like federal grants, you can't exchange money with foreign entities. There's all kinds of restrictions on how you do things when working with international partners. So finding those people within the continental US that do still do textile work is half of that. Is that just costs and scale and things like that, so much of that has been offshored over the last decades. But if you can start to get some more domestic textile processing, you can start to build up more infrastructure. But it's such a small market right now. I'm sure you didn't find there were very few people in the textile game domestically.
I mean, there is that erosion for sure in supply chains, but I think that's where the list from INDA of those non-wovens manufacturers is worth digging into more, because it's a completely different process from the spinning and weaving to make other kinds. And I don't know for all those companies, like, do they have all the means of production in the US? They're US based, they could have means of production elsewhere. But I think just seeing them as like being on the vanguard of what it means to make textiles in the US could be a helpful approach. And then we're not trying, there's also incredible and innovative work going on to rebuild the domestic textile supply chain in all kinds of other ways that I also do work on, but we might just need to shift the group that we're looking at as the potential commercial partners and not try to be going to a sheet or a towel or apparel or whatever, and instead be looking at these other kinds of products for that quicker turnaround. So just maybe broadening the potential partners into that other group. And if we're going to have this kind of like discussion or whatever, I think tapping some of them to come in and tell us what they're up against would be worth hearing.
And if you can get partnership with the end user side of it, like the hospital networks and things like that, where they probably have stakeholders who are like, look at all the waste coming out of these operations.
Yeah.
How do we make that less so?
I think you and Colleen, when we had the chance to speak to you, mentioned that some of your colleagues from the biomedical department are sort of in that of the Carter and co-authors article was, I think some are all affiliated with your biomedical school. There's a UVM biomedical school, so definitely seeing that would be a really good partner to bring in as well.
Can I ask you a question about that? Just in terms of like back to the question of market entry, right? Like that's a high bar to get into medical grade supplies. You have to go through the testing and validation and all that. It's just like extra work if you want to spin up your production. And why not go into like geotextiles or something that has like literally no barrier just to get production up, and then you can sort of figure year 2, 5, whatever, make that resource available to other markets. I don't know if you're sold on like, because I see UVM and medical up there, that's like kind of the mental model for where to go with this
I think with this was like, just like recast how everyone's thinking about textiles. Actually, geotextiles is a great one, and I'm realizing we didn't have that on our non-woven side. Remade, that white crop cover that you see on vegetable farms, that's a non-woven textile. The ground cover that the matting that you put under your shrubs so they don't get weeds around the base, that's a non-woven. So it's a great point, and that would be a place where biodegradability would be especially awesome, because you wouldn't have plastic scraps flapping around like you sometimes get when that stuff wears out over time. So yeah, completely a great one to explore, and maybe there's a group of manufacturers of those, I'm sure. I don't know. We didn't make a list of them, but I think we could find it. So
yeah, that was. I know that when we were really trying to figure out what we were ruling out, we're not going to be part of the fast fashion industry. That's not what we're interested in. Well, so what else is out there? And I think that was where the team kind of looked around, and the biomedical field just seemed like one clear area where there are lots of demand, the products, and again, COVID kind of put a spotlight on all the various types of material that is needed. And frankly, we'd like to have that on shore. We don't necessarily want to be worried that we're running out of that stuff because it's being made across the globe. And so I think it's just looking at it as a potential opportunity. But I think you're right. I think there could be, agriculture. I mean, clearly here in Vermont, maybe that's a place where that could be developed because, there are lots of applications there. So, and I think, this was sort of step one, was just like, let's put this information out there and actually see what the reaction is. And if, are there businesses or groups or other types of potential partners who are like, oh, hey, wait a second, I'd like to look into that. And that's, now at least we have some baseline information that we can start to share and see where it goes.
And I would just say, as an investor, kind of from my perspective, the education and awareness of this as a potential industry to the regional investors, not just the lending community and the grant making community, but the actual equity investors who are looking at these opportunities. I mean, we funded 2 of those companies up there.
Yeah.
Both of which
that's
were
what we heard
European
about that.
technology that's been brought over to the United States. Timber HP is the first US-based manufacturer of wood fiber insulation.
Yeah.
And Glavel is doing from glass gravel made from recycled glass for infrastructure, for road infrastructure, for green building, et cetera. So both European technology, so they're not reinventing the wheel, but they are, now bringing that to the United States in a way that's that takes a lot of capital and different kinds of capital, not just one form of capital. And those funders need to be in collaboration with each other to make something like those kind of projects work.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that we learned about those from you. I really appreciate that. That kind of was inspiring. Okay, like this is what we mean. So there's something we can get our heads around for, what that commercialization of that lab scale. It does take a long time, and these are still small businesses and localized businesses, but they're showing you that there is that pathway with the right support.
On your third pathway, how advanced is textile recycling technology? Is it ready for prime time, or is there? I'm a layperson on this, but I'm just struck that plastic recycling seems really complicated.
Yeah.
Because there's like a blend of stuff, and I'm thinking about this shirt, like the ones that 10 I would buy this decade, and not an average consumer. That I bought last week, but it's mostly cotton, but then it's got like 20% polyester in it.
Yeah.
And it's like, does that make it more complicated to pull apart and recycle?
Yeah, it absolutely does. We scratched the surface of this at one place in the report. We put in like 4 or 5 of the companies that are innovators on the blended fiber recycling, because they're all experimenting very similarly, innovating with different kind of like digestion methods essentially to pull these apart. And it could be as simple as polyester and cotton, but it could be like 5 or 6 different things. If you start looking at the tags, it's like especially if you have anything stretchy, there's elastine, there's those side panels, those are stretchy, and this isn't stretchy, and there's all kinds of stuff. So I think that technology is pretty far along. Those companies we put in our capital needs table, they've raised between 10 and 15 million for their own capitalization. Each one's a little bit different in how they go at it. And then that Spanish company that I mentioned, that optical sorting, like that field is definitely coming along, I think, pretty fast. There's quite an interesting little video on their site that shows how the thing works. So it's another place where there's a global ecosystem that's trying to figure that out and there's not one winner yet. Very kind of dynamic field. And those could also be interesting partners to kind of bring in or talk to or hear from. This was a lot. Thank you all very much for your attention and for sticking with it and these great questions, really thoughtful questions. Definitely, we're here to be a resource, and we would love to see this keep going for the region. Just want to appreciate you again, Christine, for having that vision, and all of you for being here. So look forward to continuing.
Yeah, and I would just offer that, as we're kind of considering this again, you're sort of our test audience. You're the first people who have, sort of seen this, and We'd really love if you look through the report, because I know it is a lot of information, and it's probably not super familiar to most of the folks in this industry. But I would love for folks to dig into it if you have the time and interest. And feel free to email me, let me know your thoughts, questions, criticisms, anything you want to say, because I'm trying to get a handle on, how much interest could there be here, and if there is some interest, then perhaps it's worth pursuing. And if not, then it's not. I mean, we're not going to push something that no one is interested in. But if there is interest, then that's what I think whether it's through the Vermont Forest Future Roadmap process, where this might play a role, or in the regional confer process, where this could be an opportunity. I think this is why the timing is great to be able to have this research available, so we can at least look at it and consider it.
Amazing.
So we've got time, and if anybody wants to catch the last few minutes of another session, or just enjoy the non-rainy day, then lunch will start. I think technically it's going to start at 12:15, so you've got a bit of time.
That's back down.
It's going to be over the ponds, yeah.
Yep. Cool.
But yeah, you've got some time to kill, or we can keep trying.
Yeah, I'm happy to
So,
answer more questions.
just a quick question, when we're grinding, I'm thinking wood, you grind it down that small, is it gonna wanna biodegrade pretty quick? I would think it would make it pretty quick to go, but in terms of lasting this product, that's.
And it also too depends on what the feedstock was. If it starts out with raw wood, where you still have the hemicellulose and the lignin, those are going to contribute to being able to degrade faster. If you started out with recycled paper, so it's just cellulose, that's more durable. There's less stuff for bugs and critters to want to eat.
Okay,
The lignin and the hemicellulose are the things that they want to eat.
okay.
So,
all right, that's
pure
cool.
cellulose, the only thing that really eats pure cellulose is the bacteria and termites. So,
Okay.
Thanks, Shane. Yeah, I think the surface to volume, that quality is going to contribute to it, but that would be part of the commercialization challenge, is kind of get that balance right. You don't want this to fall apart while you're wearing it, so you have to kind of get that right.
But if you want to throw it on the side of the road, you want it to be gone in a couple of weeks. You don't want it to be hanging around for a couple of years.
No.
For a couple of centuries.
Yeah, seriously, we have some other research we cited in there that even the supposedly biodegradable plastics, they ran trials on these at UC Santa Barbara, and it was like they were essentially not biodegrading, even though they have claims. In this particular trial, I'm sure there's other trial results but in this particular trial, they just weren't. They weren't.
Are you talking about those compostable utensils?
PLA, yeah, that's.
Needs to be an elevated temperature, elevated humidity. It isn't like garden, backyard composting kind of conditions.
Okay. It's a real digester kind of thing.
Yeah, it's considered industrial composting because you gotta inject a little bit of energy.
Put something to it.